There is a moment, not at the beginning but at the end, when silence becomes heavier than sound, when a courtroom beyond time gathers witnesses who cannot speak, and even angels stand still as if afraid to remember. Books are opened, not written by human hands but inscribed by reality itself. Every hidden thought, every unseen act, every secret ever buried rising to the surface. And in that moment, nothing is debated, only revealed. But long before that final unveiling, something went wrong. Not on earth, but in heaven. Not a war, not a collapse, a decision. A fracture so precise, so deliberate that it did not shatter creation, it infected it. The veil was torn, not for humanity to glimpse eternity, but for one man to see what should never be seen. His name was Enoch. He was not taken to a place of peace. He was taken to testimony, to chambers where truth is not gentle but unbearable. He saw what history forgot, what religion softened, what time tried to erase. And what he witnessed was not just the origin of corruption, it was the blueprint of what is still unfolding. A warning, sealed in vision, waiting for a generation willing to look again. If you have reached this moment, then perhaps this is not accidental. This is not just a story being told. This is something being uncovered. And you are not simply listening, you are stepping into a record that was never meant to disappear. Because the first thing Enoch realized was this: the fall of angels was not chaos, it was chosen. Before the flood, before the fountains of the deep were broken open, before Noah ever lifted a plank of wood into the air, there was a decision made in the unseen world. Not a burst of chaos, not a sudden accident. A decision, deliberate, measured, shared. The ancient text does not present the watchers as wandering spirits or reckless creatures of impulse. They were heavenly beings assigned to watch, to observe the generations of men, to remain within the order appointed by the Most High. They belonged to structure, to rank, to responsibility. And that is what makes their fall so terrifying. They did not rebel out of ignorance. They knew where the boundary stood. They knew what it meant to cross it. And still, they chose it. At the center of this terrible resolve stood Samyaza, not a beast from legend, not a symbol, but a leader within a company of watchers who understood that desire had already become conspiracy. He feared that others might hesitate when the cost became real, that he alone would bear the guilt of the act they secretly wanted. So he demanded an oath. Not one voice, not 10, 200. 200 watchers binding themselves under a curse, swearing together that none would turn back. In the tradition preserved in 1st Enoch, they descend in the days before the flood upon Mount Hermon, a place whose very name becomes associated with the oath that sealed their rebellion. So the corruption of the world did not begin merely with appetite. It began with covenant twisted into treason. And when they came down, they did not descend like broken prisoners hurled from heaven. They arrived with intent, like living stars crossing into forbidden territory. The old world must have looked upward in terror and wonder, unable to understand what it was seeing. These were beings clothed in the memory of heaven, yet no longer moving in obedience to heaven's will. And what they desired was not a throne, not sacrifice, not the kingdoms of men. It was union with the daughters of humanity. That is the second and even more unsettling truth. The first great corruption described here is not war, but the violation of created order itself. A boundary between realms was crossed not by force alone, but by willing embrace. They took wives for themselves such as they chose, and with that act, something unnatural entered history. This is where the story darkens beyond ordinary sin. In Genesis 6, the language is brief and mysterious. In Enochic tradition, that mystery is unfolded into a theology of cosmic rebellion. The problem was not merely desire. The problem was mixture, heaven reaching into earth without permission, authority severed from obedience, intimacy turned into invasion. In biblical thought, sin is never only about the act itself. It is about disorder, about taking what belongs within God's pattern and bending it into something that serves the self. The Watchers did not simply break a rule, they attacked the architecture of creation, and if that sounds distant, it should not. Because every age is tempted by the same ancient lie that crossing God's boundaries will make us greater, freer, more complete. But the vision of Enoch whispers the opposite. Some doors are sealed not to starve us, but to protect the world from becoming unrecognizable. The Watchers opened one of those doors, and what stepped through it would soon devour the earth. For the children born from this forbidden union were not symbols and not rumors. They were the beginning of a catastrophe with a name. The children that followed were not miracles. They were contradictions made flesh, the offspring of a union that should never have existed, and the ancient world would remember them by a name heavy with dread, the Nephilim. The word itself feels like a shadow falling across the page. They were not merely giants in height, as though the horror of the story could be contained in scale alone. They were giants in consequence, beings whose existence bent the moral weight of the earth downward. What they inherited was not harmony, not the measured balance that marks the order of creation. They inherited excess, excess of appetite, excess of force, excess of presence. In them, power was severed from wisdom, strength detached from reverence, desire released from limit. And that is why their arrival is not described as a wonder, but as a calamity. Their hunger consumed the earth. First the harvests, then the flocks, then whatever human labor could gather from the ground. The old traditions preserved in Enoch speak in stark and terrifying language. When the resources of the land could no longer sustain them, they turned upon humanity itself. The image is almost unbearable, yet it carries a theological weight that cannot be ignored. Sin, when enlarged beyond restraint, never remains private. It devours outward. It takes more than it was ever given. It feeds until the world around it begins to fail. And so the Nephilim became more than violent beings. They became a living sign that creation itself had been pushed out of joint. But destruction was not their deepest impact. It was influence. That is the more unsettling truth. They normalized the unnatural. Once heaven's boundary had been crossed, the earth began to learn new ways of breaking. The violence of the giants was only one layer of the corruption. Beneath it, and perhaps even more dangerous, was a new education. The world changed not slowly, not by quiet drift, but with a sudden and catastrophic acceleration. Blood filled the ground. Disorder spread through the living world. Ancient Jewish tradition describes not only human wickedness increasing, but the entire fabric of life becoming corrupted. The earth in Enoch's vision is not a silent stage. It is a witness. It groans under the weight of what has been taught upon it. Azazel emerges here as one of the darkest figures in the story, not simply because he rebelled, but because he instructed. He taught men the crafting of swords, knives, shields, and instruments of war. He revealed the working of metals and the techniques by which beauty could be manipulated into seduction and vanity. Other watchers disclosed enchantments, the cutting of roots, the reading of signs, the movements of the stars, and the hidden patterns of heaven. This is one of the most provocative dimensions of the Enochic tradition. Humanity's leap in knowledge is presented not as neutral progress, but as corrupted transmission. The issue is not that skill, beauty, or study are evil in themselves. Scripture elsewhere honors craftsmanship, wisdom, and the ordered observation of creation. The problem is that knowledge detached from the fear of God becomes a weapon in the hands of disordered desire. And that thought presses disturbingly close to every age. What if the greatest advances of a civilization can also become the instruments of its ruin? What if the first irreversible corruption of humanity was not ignorance but misused understanding? Enoch's vision does not condemn knowledge as such. It condemns knowledge unmoored from obedience, power without holiness, insight without alignment to the Creator's design. In that sense, the giants were not the only monsters born in those days. A new world was being born with them, a world armed, adorned, enlightened, and already decaying from within. And as the violence rose and the cries of the earth grew louder, heaven could no longer remain still. It cried out, not in poetry, but in testimony. In the world of Scripture, blood is never mute. From Abel onward, spilled blood speaks. and in the vision preserved by Enoch, the violence of that age rose like an accusation through the fabric of creation itself. The ground had been forced to drink what it was never meant to carry. The fields that should have yielded bread had become witnesses to slaughter. The air itself seemed thick with complaint. This is the next terrible turn in the story. Evil was no longer only a human crisis. It had become a cosmic grievance. And heaven, which had watched, now listened. Then the great archangels appear at the edge of this corruption. Michael, Uriel, Raphael, and Gabriel, names that carry weight in Jewish tradition, not as decorative figures, but as servants standing close to the divine throne. They looked down upon the earth and saw more than ordinary wickedness. They saw contamination. They saw creation disfigured, humanity brutalized, and a boundary shattered that no creature had authority to cross. The old order had been violated from above and below at once. This is the moment when the mood of the story shifts with terrifying force. Heaven does not merely grieve, heaven responds. The God who appointed order is not indifferent when order is profaned, and the response is not hesitant, it is judicial. Azazel, who taught the arts of destruction and vanity, is singled out with dreadful clarity. In 1st Enoch, he is bound hand and foot, cast into darkness, thrown into the wilderness place called Dudael, covered with jagged stones and reserved for the final fire. The others, the rebellious watchers who descended with him, are not immediately erased. They are imprisoned beneath the earth, held in confinement until the day of greater judgment. And that detail matters. They are not annihilated. They are preserved. Their sentence is not impulsive wrath, but reserved justice. The God of Enoch's vision does not lose control. He stores judgment. He appoints its time. Even punishment moves according to order. The Nephilim are given a different end, and it is one of the darkest ironies in the entire tradition. They are not rescued by their strength. They are handed over to it. They are left to destroy one another. Violence turned inward, corruption consuming itself. The same force that devoured the earth becomes the instrument of their ruin. It is a pattern the Bible returns to again and again. Evil carries within itself the seed of its own collapse. Kingdoms built on blood eventually drown in it. Power without righteousness begins by conquering others and ends by tearing itself apart. The giants who once seemed invincible become proof that monstrous strength is still fragile before divine decree. And yet even this is not the end, because judgment descends but explanation has not yet been given. The watchers, now humiliated and afraid, realize too late that rebellion has no path home. The earth has cried, heaven has answered. But one question remains suspended like a blade in the air: who will carry the message between the condemned and the throne of God? That is where the story narrows suddenly and with almost unbearable stillness to one man. Not a king, not a warrior, not a priest from a temple of stone. A man who walked with God before the floodwaters ever came. Enoch. And the next thing he will see is not merely judgment from a distance, but the hidden architecture of the unseen world itself. Enoch was not sent first to speak, but to see. That is what makes his calling so severe. Prophets often receive words, but Enoch was given landscapes, regions of reality hidden behind the thin curtain of ordinary sight. He was led beyond the world men build with their hands and into the deeper architecture beneath history itself. What he saw resists easy language. It is not mythology in the shallow sense, nor philosophy dressed in symbols. It is revelation shaped as journey theology, given the weight of stone, fire, wind, and distance. He saw prisons prepared for angels, places not improvised in anger, but established within the moral structure of the cosmos. Judgment in this vision is not chaos breaking loose. It is order revealing what rebellion has earned. He was shown chambers of the dead, and the silence there was not empty. It was divided. This is one of the most startling features of the Enochic world. The dead are not described as dissolved into sameness. They wait in separation, distinguished not by earthly rank or public honor, but by truth. Some rest in expectation. Some remain under accusation. Some remember. Some cry out. The unseen realm is not a democratic fog where all destinies blur together. It is already morally shaped. That detail should unsettle anyone who imagines death as a great eraser. In Enoch's vision, death does not erase truth. It exposes it. The hidden character of a life continues into the chambers where that life must wait for the final answer of God. He saw fire, but not merely as a symbol of destruction. He saw it as containment. This is a profound turn. Fire in biblical theology often purifies, judges, reveals, and separates. Here it also restrains. The same cosmos that allows creatures freedom also contains the consequences of their revolt. Enoch is not wandering through random marvels. He is being taught that the universe is morally governed at every level. He sees the treasuries of the winds, the paths of lightning, the storehouses of natural forces, the measured obedience of creation to its maker. Sun, moon, stars, water, seasons, none move by whim. They move under command. The ancient world saw the heavens not as empty space, but as a liturgy of obedience. And that is where the vision becomes almost unbearable in its clarity. Everything obeys except fallen angels and men. This is the great contrast at the center of Enoch's journey. The universe is not fundamentally chaotic. It is ordered, responsive, aligned. Rebellion, then, is not the natural state of things. It is a decision against the grain of reality itself. To sin is not merely to break a rule. It is to live in contradiction to the way the universe is held together. That is why the fall of the Watchers is so catastrophic. It is not just a moral failure. It is an assault on the music of creation. And humanity, instead of learning from the obedience of stars and seas, has too often joined the rebellion of what should have remained holy. Then the vision rises higher still. Beyond prisons, beyond chambers, beyond the foundations of the world, Enoch sees a throne. Not an empty symbol, but a center, authority, majesty, finality. And near that throne, or seated in relation to it, depending on the vision's movement, appears a figure of overwhelming significance, one later traditions would recognize with trembling the Son of Man. Here the book turns from cosmic ruin toward ultimate judgment and hope, because the next revelation will not only explain the end of evil, it will unveil the one through whom all hidden things are brought into the light. Enoch was not only shown the beginning of corruption, he was shown its end. And the end was not vague, not symbolic in the thin sense, not a blur of religious emotion. It was judgment cold in its precision, terrible in its clarity, and utterly beyond appeal. In the visions of First Enoch, history does not drift endlessly. It moves toward disclosure. Books are opened and the image is unforgettable because it means that reality has been keeping record all along. Nothing is lost in the noise of time. Nothing is buried so deeply that heaven cannot summon it back into the light. Deeds, words, violence, arrogance, hidden cruelty, secret faithfulness, everything stands revealed. So before the throne of God, forgetting is not a form of escape. Kings are there, rulers are there, the mighty, the admired, the feared, the ones who built their names like towers above the generations. They are all seen without ornament. The Book of Enoch returns again and again to this reversal. The high ones of the earth who once seemed untouchable do not survive the gaze of divine justice by rank or reputation. Power cannot negotiate there. Wealth cannot soften the verdict. Status does not impress eternity. And yet the terror of this judgment is not that God sees only the monstrous. It is that he sees all of it, the hidden, the polished, the public, the private. The words spoken before crowds, and the motives whispered only in the chamber of the heart. In that world, appearance finally dies, and truth remains standing. Then comes the great division. Not between nations as men count nations, not between the educated and the simple, not between the visible winners and visible failures of history, but between those aligned with God's order and those who hardened themselves against it. This is one of the deepest theological currents running through Enoch. Righteousness is not merely private morality, and wickedness is not merely bad behavior. They are two rival orientations of existence. One bends toward the Creator, the other bends away. And when the final separation comes, it is not arbitrary. It is the unveiling of what each life has already become. The righteous enter into light, peace, and vindication. The corrupt pass into exclusion, into the ruin their rebellion has prepared for itself. Justice in this vision is not theatrical, it is fitting. And then the vision turns once more, and perhaps this is the most unexpected thing in all of Enoch's terrible revelations. Judgment is not the end of the story. After exposure comes renewal. After separation comes restoration. The earth, once polluted by violence, once forced to carry the blood and madness of corrupted beings, is not abandoned. It is healed. The imagery is deeply biblical in its logic. Even when expressed through apocalyptic grandeur, creation is not thrown away as a failed experiment. It is restored under the righteousness of God. The righteous are not rescued into emptiness, but into a renewed order, a world in which fear no longer governs, where oppression does not rise again, where the fracture opened by rebellion is finally closed. The mountains, the fields, the streams, the very fabric of the world are seen again under blessing. This is the last great reversal. Divine judgment is not only the destruction of evil, it is the recovery of what evil tried to steal. So the Book of Enoch does not end merely as a warning. It ends as a disclosure of the true shape of reality. Evil is loud but temporary. Corruption spreads but not forever. The wicked may appear rooted, but they are already passing away. And the righteous, even when hidden, even when mocked, even when made to suffer beneath the weight of a crooked age, are moving toward a kingdom older than the stars and stronger than death. That is the final burden of Enoch's vision and its final comfort, as well. History is not falling apart. It is moving toward a throne. And if what Enoch saw is true, then the question is no longer about the watchers. It is about us. Because the same pattern still echoes through every generation. Not angels this time, but choices. Quiet, daily, often unseen choices that shape who we become long before any final judgment is revealed. The ancient warning is not only about rebellion in heaven, it is about alignment on earth. For those who have lived long enough to see the world change, to witness both beauty and decay, this message carries weight. Legacy is not built by what we achieve, but by what we remain faithful to. Not every truth is loud. Not every victory is visible, but the things that endure are the things rooted in what is right. Enoch reminds us that nothing is wasted, no act of integrity, no moment of quiet faith, no decision to choose truth over convenience. These are not small things, they are eternal things. And perhaps the deepest comfort is this: the world may feel uncertain, even fractured, but it is not without direction. There is still a throne, there is still order, there is still a future where what is broken will be restored. So the question is simple but not easy. When everything is revealed, what will remain of us? So what have we uncovered? A story of angels who chose to fall a world that learned power without wisdom, and a vision that refused to let corruption have the final word. The Book of Enoch is not simply about the past. It is about the pattern that continues, the quiet line between order and rebellion that runs through every human life. This is why the story does not end when the vision closes. It continues in reflection, in the questions we carry after the silence returns. Because the deeper message was never just about what the watchers did, it is about what we are becoming. Are we building lives aligned with truth, or drifting towards something we cannot see until it is revealed? Are we shaping a legacy that will stand, or one that will fade when the books are opened? If this journey stirred something within you, don't let it disappear into the noise of the world. Share your thoughts below, not as a comment, but as part of a living conversation. Like this video if it made you see deeper. Subscribe if you're ready to keep exploring what has been hidden in plain sight. And stay with us, because the next revelation may not just answer questions, it may challenge everything you thought you understood.